Welcome to the Bookman's Corner, the show that features the latest and most interesting nonfiction books. I'm Lois Lindstrom. I had to laugh when I read the chapter headline of our guest author's book, The Most Dangerous Food to Eat is a Wedding Cake. Our guest this month is an authority on relationships and loving. Dr. Gordon Livingston is a psychiatrist and author of 4 books, Only Spring, Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart, and Never Stop Dancing, published in 22 countries. He is with us today to discuss his latest book, How to Love, Choosing Well at Every Stage of Life, published by DeCapa Press. He lives and works in Columbia, Maryland. Glad you're here, Dr. Livingston.
Nice to be here, Lois.
One of your Amazon.com reviewers wrote that your book, How to Love, could just as easily been titled, Finding the Right Person to Share Your Life With and Avoiding Those Who Can Cause You a Lot of Unhappiness and Pain. Since February 14th is Valentine's Day, the day we celebrate love, and there are many displays of chocolates and cards with messages of love, why are so many people disappointed in love?
I think people are confused about what love is. It's considered a word that's almost indefinable, but I think there is a definition, and my own personal preference is that we love someone when their needs and desires rise to the level of our own. They may even exceed our own interests, and my operational definition, therefore, is, would you take a bullet for this person?
Take a bullet for the person,
Yes.
right? I don't think many people think about that when they get married.
No, and we never know what we'll do under those circumstances, but we have to be able to contemplate it if we're going to say that we love someone.
Okay. Well, what is the secret to a happy marriage?
The secret to a happy marriage is to marry the right person in the first place.
I see.
And it's this that we're really ill-equipped to do, because the decisions we make when we're in our late teens or early 20s tend not to work out in the long run, according to the divorce statistics, and even those marriages that remain intact are often not very satisfying.
But this wasn't always the case. I mean, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the rate of divorce was a lot less.
Yeah, but I think that was just social pressure. I think people were, there was a stigma attached to divorce that forced people who otherwise would have preferred to leave each other to stay together. And so I'm not sure that people have changed since then, although there was an advantage to having the respective roles of men and women more clear-cut and more societally defined. Now, for example, that we're past the time when the man brings home the money and the woman takes care of the children.
That's right, the housekeeper.
I think that with that change, women have felt less dependent and more free to entertain the idea of divorce if they're unhappy.
Okay. So you think that the divorce rate is because that the roles have changed? I mean, do you think that's why the divorce rate is so high?
Well, yes, I think it's just possible for people to live independently now, but also a lot of the stigma surrounding divorce has evaporated over the years.
That's right.
And people are then less tolerant of an unhappy relationship.
Right. Well, do you believe in love at first sight?
No, I don't. I think that that's a cultural myth that implies that whatever surge of attraction that we may feel initially when we meet someone is going to stand us in good stead over the years. In fact, it kind of disconnects the brain and whatever hormones may be generated, and so
it's chemical, right?
Yeah, I think that I think that is a sort of a kind of chemical attraction, more like lust than love. But to choose somebody that we really want to spend the rest of our lives with, I think requires some thought and some observation, and that's why I'm in favor of long engagements.
Long engagements, interesting. Well, what is the most important trait to look for in your search for love?
Kindness.
Kindness.
Kindness, I think, is the queen of virtues. That willingness to give of oneself to another person, to demonstrate empathy, and to be able to bring their needs up to the level of your own. And not everybody can do that well, and we're not necessarily in this kind of acquisitive, competitive society, we're not trained to look for that, and that's why we tend to make these important decisions on more superficial grounds.
Right, and it's kind of rare, actually, kindness, especially.
Yeah, I think it is in its highest form.
Yes,
and because it's not valued, and because it's not associated with a high income or
getting ahead.
Physical beauty, that people tend to overlook that truth, that of all the virtues, that's the one that wears the best.
What is the most ominous personality characteristic among people to avoid in terms of falling in love with? I mean,
and that would be self-absorption. That is someone who is so focused on their own needs that they don't have much to give anybody else. People who are extremely narcissistic, self-centered, and see the rest of the world as an audience in a play in which they're the star. Those people tend not to be good listeners, and they tend not to be good companions over time.
Right. Well, I mean, do you believe in forgiveness when someone that you love abandons you? I mean, I noticed in your book you talked about forgiveness and kindness, but then what happens when you have a partner who takes off and leaves you?
Well, I think in that situation, you can forgive them in the sense that you can accept that act, but to take them back, or at least to take them back endlessly, as many people do, when the other person has betrayed them in some way, even short of a departure from the relationship, I think that's just asking for trouble, because the best predictor of future behavior turns out to be past behavior, and so for people to stay in abusive relationships, for example, or relationships in which they've been betrayed,
started a divorce proceedings.
Well, I would think so. A lot of things go into that decision, and nobody can tell anyone else what they should do with their lives. But I think if someone is behaving in a disloyal way, then you certainly have to think about what's best for you.
And then there are those individuals who are very. They order you around. They give you a lot of unwanted suggestions. They reprimand you all the time. These are people that are in relationships where they've said they're going to cherish each other, and yet they're acting rather despicable to each other.
Yes, I mean that's a personality trait. People who are very controlling, and insistent on getting their own way. And this is what you need to discern early in the relationship before you commit yourself to someone, because it's because that isn't a trait that just emerges after the marriage.
Right.
And so, but it's intolerable. I mean, well, people have to respect each other and respect each other's needs, and if they don't do that, if one person wants to constantly be in control, then that's not going to work.
Yeah, that's not going to work. That's right. Well, I read that the #1 cause of couple conflict is money. And how can couples best resolve spending issues?
Well, again, you have to look beyond the superficial problem, which may be some disagreement about how to spend money, into the more fundamental issues, and that is how much independence are you able to have in the relationship? Does the other person really care about you enough to function independently and to act in your own interests and in the interests of the relationship? And so again, it's a stage like disagreement about child raising and so on that people tend to fight about, but that's not the real issue. I mean, the real issue is much more in the area of kindness and respect.
Okay, kindness and respect. So if someone is overspending a great deal and the other person having to pay more and more of the bills, then there is a respect issue then.
Well, I think it's one of those things that you need to look at before committing yourself to the relationship. Okay. How does this person handle money? I mean, there's this whole series of questions. How do they treat people who are performing a service for them? How do they drive? Right. How do they make you feel? That's probably the most important question, is how do you feel when you're in the presence of this other person?
Right.
And that's why, to answer all those questions, you really have to know someone well, and that's why young people who are often caught up in things like appearance or income prospects or heaven knows what, and make the decision based on that. They tend to overlook the more important questions, which is this the kind of person that I'm going to still be in love with in 10 years, in 20 years?
Well, perhaps that's why young people need to attend counseling sessions before getting married to learn how to fight properly, to learn how to negotiate properly.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, and that is that there's a whole body of kind of common wisdom that implies that all couples fight, for example.
Yes.
That's not true. Some couples don't fight, and so I think it's important.
Or not as much. I mean,
well, some couples don't fight at all. Everyone disagrees. There's always disagreements, but but if they degenerate into fighting, that's a bad sign.
That's very negative.
But that's kind of what we're led to expect. You know, nobody's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. You always have to compromise and negotiate.
Right.
And I think that all of those things cause our expectations to be lowered, and so when our relationships are unsatisfying in some way, that's what we fall back on. Well, we're not working hard enough at it. It's kind of I think of it as the pick and shovel school of marital advice. You know, you've got to work at these relationships. The fact is that a good relationship doesn't require a lot of work. If you've made a good choice and the other person really does love you, then you're not going to have to.
But there's so few of those out there.
There are few of those, but we should all aspire to them. And the fact that we don't means that we don't know much, especially when we're young, about how to form relationships or how to choose people.
Right.
And that's why the subtitle that was suggested there, people to avoid and people to cherish, is apt. I mean, that's what we need to learn.
Right. Well, exactly. One of the traits you mentioned that you should cherish is someone with a good sense of humor. But then again, there are a lot of people that really don't know how to tell a good joke, or they aren't that clever, but they're good in other ways. But you think having a good sense of humor is really vital, right?
Particularly the ability to laugh at oneself, because people who don't have senses of humor are those. These traits exist in constellations, so that, for example, cruelty and disloyalty go together, just as kindness and tolerance tend to go together.
Okay.
So what we're looking for is someone who has a constellation of traits, and the absence of a sense of humor is a poor prognostic sign, because it's one of the healthiest of all defenses against the vagaries of life, is to be able to laugh and to be able to laugh at oneself, and not to take oneself so seriously. And that's why I think it ought to be included along with things like kindness and loyalty and honesty and those other things that we're looking for.
Right. Well, then you think about it. You know, people are usually so deeply in love when they first get married. So how do you keep love vibrant and strong over the years? Because that seems to be the big problem. It seems like people start off well, and then over time, it's. Do you think it's because they get fatigued with each other? I mean, they get tired of each other's personalities?
Yes. And which means that they've made a bad choice in the first place, because personalities don't change over time, by and large. We can change symptoms like anxiety or depression, but one's fundamental personality, that is the habitual way that we relate to the world and to each other, is quite stable from late adolescence. So if we're surprised that the person we married 10 years ago doesn't seem like the same person, that's more a commentary on our acuity in choosing them in the first place. That somehow we didn't notice that they were very controlling or critical, for example, or that they turn out to be disloyal. We're shocked, and yet what we know about personality is that those characteristics are present from late adolescence on, and that the fact is that we're just not trained to see them. They don't have courses in school that enable us to discern them.
That's for sure. You also wrote in your book, you said that physical beauty is what attracts men to women, and that women tend to be looking for a good provider and good father. But isn't the fact that women tend to lose beauty over time a big problem in sustaining a long-term marriage? Or do you think that
Well, I guess that's a part of, particularly if you define beauty in the conventional American sense of, whether your face is symmetrical or how your body happens to be shaped, because that obviously does change over time. But if you have a little bit more expansive definition that includes inner beauty, particularly the ability to give and receive
kindness.
love, yeah, kindness, exactly, then that's you're much more likely to make a good decision.
Okay. And you also wrote, you said you heard in counseling sessions, people say, I love her, but I'm not in love with her.
Yeah, and I never know what that means. I think it means that we really don't love this person, but we feel obligated to say that we do because we're married to them. I mean, if you lose the sense that this is the person who is the center of your life, or if you lose the sense that you're the center of that other person's life, that's a very uncomfortable feeling.
Yes, yes, yes. And you also wrote that it's clear from divorce statistics that something is lacking in the preparation of adolescents in the United States to have lasting relationships and more satisfying lives. I mean, should high schools offer courses such as characteristics of a good marriage?
Of course they should, and you could call the course The Pursuit of Happiness, and devote time to looking at some of these personality.
I'm sure the kids would love it.
Characters, I think they would. Of course, there's always the question of who's going to teach it, and the question of, is the school going to make it a part of their curriculum? Because it naturally implies the teaching of some values. And school administrators are worried about how parents are going to respond to that. But I think it would be at least as useful as algebra or geometry in later life.
Well, how can you change a marital partner who is a control freak or who is not flexible? I mean, what can you do?
You can't.
You can't?
No, you can't.
Really, you can't.
And that's pretty none of us are very. I mean, and I'm in the business of change. That is, people come to me to change, and when someone comes and they're suffering from excessive anxiety, or they're suffering from a situational depression, I'm much more optimistic than if they come in and are obviously suffering from what's called a personality disorder. That is, that there's something about the habitual way they relate to other people that isn't working for them. I know I'm going to have my hands full, and these are people who want to change. And the characteristic of most people with personality problems is that they don't want to change, because they even if they're feeling very uncomfortable, they blame everybody else.
And they're comfortable doing that. They're comfortable.
This is what they. So to change somebody who doesn't want to be changed is nearly impossible, even for a therapist. And so to imagine, and a lot of people get married with this idea that, okay, well, he drinks a little too much, and I kind of don't, and he is pretty critical. But I'm sure once we get married, once we have children,
it'll all work out.
My love will change him.
Right.
That does not tend to work out.
I see. Hence the high divorce rate.
Exactly.
Well, and what about then with someone with a pessimistic attitude? They're a poor life partner as well, right?
Yeah, they are, because optimism is a very important trait. And pessimism tends to lead to depression. People are and in life we don't get what we deserve. We get what we expect. Well, pessimists have very low expectations, and they're constantly met. So it's hard. There's an old saying: always borrow money from a pessimist, because he won't expect to be paid back.
That's right.
And that's one of the characteristics. But they're very hard to live with, because they tend not to enjoy their lives.
And then you have the other characteristics of someone who being chronically late and being very forgetful.
Yeah, passive-aggressive people are also extremely hard to live with, because it comes out in indirect ways. They don't make very good workers, and they don't make very good marriage partners, because if they take their unhappiness out in these ways, and in where they just show up late chronically, or don't do their share of the work, and so that's the way they deflect blame.
Right. And then what is this attitude of mistrust? How can you spot someone who has mistrust?
Well, just by seeing how they interact with other people in the world, and so when you're in the process of trying to select somebody who you're going to spend your life with, you have to just watch them over time and see.
Observe them, right?
Yeah, observe them. But the other issue here is that we have to develop these characteristics in ourselves if we're going to expect them in others. So it's futile to look for the perfect man or woman if you don't have some of those characteristics.
Well, in today's world, it seems like many couples are living together before getting married. Is this better to do that before
Well, it's
getting
interesting
married?
because when they do studies of these couples who have lived together
For many
and
years,
then
yeah.
get married, their marriages don't last any longer than anybody else's.
Why?
Because the crucial decision is the decision to live together. Once they've done that, they're then on a track toward marriage that that is going to continue.
Okay.
And so it's as if they married each other by that act.
Okay.
And so they're they're acting like married couples, and they get divorced at about the same rate everybody else does.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, let's discuss the dating stage. You were very frank about advising people to stay clear of individuals with drinking or drug-related problems. I mean, people who overindulge should be avoided. Isn't this a bit harsh? I mean, what about those people who are trying to manage or change their bad habits?
Yeah, I think this whole issue of who to avoid is a difficult one, because I've gotten letters from people since these books have come out about you're advising people to avoid me. Because I have, for example, borderline personality, and I'm trying to change that, and here you're telling me. So that is a little bit harsh. So what I put in, I finally changed the phrasing of that to people to be wary of. But it's certainly safe to say that being wary of someone who has an addiction of any sort is probably a smart thing to do. Whether you choose to avoid them is another question. But if you choose to marry them, it's quite likely that that's going to be one of the things that you're going to have to struggle with in the marriage.
Goodness. And then you also wrote about being concerned about someone who thinks that people are basically good at heart. I mean, you cited Anne Frank, who wrote in her diary that people are basically good at heart.
It's certainly good to be optimistic, and it's certainly good to think well of other people, but you have to be aware that there are people in the world who act in very destructive ways. So when I read that in Anne Frank's diary, I think to myself what the outcome of her life was, which was to be killed by these people.
Right.
And it seems naively optimistic. And so I think we just have to be aware that there are people in the world, for example, people without conscience,
Yes.
Sociopaths and so on, that are not going to respond to our optimism, and that we overestimate sometimes our ability to change others.
Right. So your feeling is that people that have alcohol or drug-related problems, you have to assess each situation individually. Then, right? You can't make a sweeping recommendation.
Yeah, even AA advises people who are trying to work through an addiction not to try to form a relationship with anybody for at least a year after they've been sober. And I think that's wise, because people do.
It takes a long time to change, then, right?
It does. That's right, and people are certainly capable of changing, and people do, and should be encouraged to attain a sobriety. But it's just something else to factor in when you're thinking about a long-term commitment.
And do you think as a society, Americans are lying a lot more and not telling the truth? Do you think that is a big problem with relationships? People just constantly not quite coming up with truthful answers?
Well, if you look at dating websites, you'd have to agree with that. I mean, if you talk to people who have used them, you hear there's a lot of misrepresentation going on. Pictures that were taken 20 years ago being posted,
Right.
or statements about themselves that turn out not to be true.
Yeah, so this person's been divorced several times, right?
Yeah, but maybe that's just a question of there being more opportunity. But again, an argument in favor of committing ourselves only to those we really know well,
Right.
and are friends with.
Right. Well, do you think you should be leery of someone who has been married several times?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's so because I mean that's certainly in most cases a sign that other people have been
And they have commitment issues, right?
right have decided that they didn't want to stay married to them. So again, none of these characteristics is disqualifying, but it argues in favor of getting to know somebody really well.
Yes, yes. And so your feeling is you should know how you feel when you're in the company of another person. If you don't feel good, then that person's not the right person for you.
I think it's one of the best indications of what this other person is like. How do they make us feel? Do we feel better about ourselves when we're in their presence? And if the answer to that is no, particularly if they're if they do things like criticize us in ways that tend to diminish our sense of ourselves, that's a real danger signal.
Well, Dr. Livingston, are there any more points you'd like to make before we end our discussion and get to our websites to get the book?
I think the most important thing is to just not accept the conventional wisdom, which is that everybody is that nobody's perfect, and while that's technically true, that doesn't mean the relationship can't be perfect. So I think we ought to set our sights higher, set a higher standard, and not not settle for less. Just because we're in our late 20s and want to have children, or some other reason that sort of pushes us toward these commitments. So I think I think that's why we have to be careful.
And now, where can our viewers get your book?
Well, they can get it anywhere. They can find it on Amazon and in their local bookstores, or.
And you're a writer as well, too, because you have written articles in the Washington Post.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of writing over the years, and so I'm one of those people that answers their email. So if the readers have anything to say, I'd be glad to hear it.
Well, this book is wonderful, How to Love. I really enjoyed it, and great to talk to you, and thank you for watching. And we'll be back with another edition of the Bookman's Corner.